Hello everyone, happy Halloween and welcome to another Rewind review. In this video we are taking a look at a horror movie that I have never seen before, and that is Fright Night. Released in 1985, Fright Night sees a teenager believing that the newcomer in his neighbourhood is a vampire, so he turns to an actor in a television-hosted horror movie show for help to deal with the undead. Written and directed by Tom Holland, no, not that Tom Holland, the movie stars William Ragsdale, Amanda Beers, Chris Sarandon, Roddy McDowall, Stephen Jeffries and Dorothy Fielding. Yes, you heard me right, up until the past week I had never seen this film before. In fact, I barely knew anything about it, but that's not to say that I wasn't aware of it. All I knew about this movie was, it involves vampires, Roddy McDowall's in it, there's a creepy house, and that's it. I went into this movie pretty much blind, which is a bit of a no-no when it comes to me in horror movies. But if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you have seen me getting a bit braver about the horror movies that I have been exploring. I won't lie, I do still have some reservation when it comes to horror movies, but I have been trying to push past that. I don't know why I'm building this up as a really scary movie, because it really isn't. Anyway, truth be told, I first became aware of Fright Night because of the 2011 remake with Colin Farrell and David Tennant. I haven't seen it, but I do remember seeing an advert for it late at night on TV, and that's how I found out about these movies being about vampires. Colin Farrell with a burning cross in his hand, and he goes, "Really?" So I've always had some curiosity towards it, but for some reason I just didn't see it. But it wasn't until quite recently that I discovered it was a remake, so I started looking for an excuse to watch the original. And seeing as though we are in the middle of spooky season and this movie has turned 40 years old this year, that seems like a pretty good excuse. So let's dive into Fright Night. No, hang on. I've got to do this right. Welcome to Fright Night. Close enough. Fright Night follows a teenage high schooler called Charlie Brewster, a horror fan who loves a TV show called Fright Night. But one night he spots something he can't quite explain and becomes convinced that his new next door neighbour is actually a vampire. The problem is, nobody believes him. And after trying the police and trying to convince his friends, Charlie approaches the host of Fright Night and self-proclaimed vampire killer Peter Vincent for help. But the situation escalates when the vampire neighbour sets his sights on Charlie's girlfriend. Together, Charlie and Peter desperately race against time to defeat him and stop him before he gets to her. The best way I can describe the story for this is, it's kind of like a supernatural version of Rear Window. It's actually also very heavily inspired by The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and that's official, which, ironically, this does have a wolf in it, but it's one of the vampires who transformed into it, so it's not actually a werewolf or anything. That's a power that vampires have that very rarely gets featured in movies, so it was really cool to see, even if it was just for the one scene. But unfortunately, there's no werewolves actually in this, which I was fully expecting to happen, especially since this movie opens up on a shot of a full moon, and there's a wolf howling in the background. If it's a supernatural horror movie and that's the first thing you see, that's where your mind goes. So I was convinced that there was going to be a big twist and werewolves were going to be revealed to be a part of this, and they were going to either help the situation or become another problem for Charlie to face. But nope, this is completely oriented around vampires. This is a proper old school vampire movie that completely embraces all the tropes and cliches that you come to expect. It's not the most original film, I can't deny, but it does find some fun ways to play into expectations. A big one being that the main character, Charlie, is a big horror movie fan, so he is very familiar with how vampire lore works. It is kind of self-aware at times, and I can understand why people have compared it to things like Scream. I don't know if I would say it goes that far, but it does have elements. The story itself is pretty simple and straightforward. There's not a huge amount to it, but there is traces of more going on. Jerry the vampire gets drawn towards Amy, Charlie's girlfriend, because she reminds him of a long-lost love. There's even a portrait of this woman in Jerry's house, but I don't know if it was cut or what, because it doesn't actually go anywhere or really serve any relevance to the plot. It just gives Jerry an excuse to target her. You could honestly trim that stuff or use it to develop Jerry more, which they could have done in a novelisation for all I know. I haven't read it. I know there is a Fright Night Part 2, and if this story was continued in that, I wouldn't have a problem, but I highly doubt it is. But that said, I do appreciate how this movie doesn't mess around. It jumps straight into the plot and it keeps focused on the main story. The runtime for Fright Night is just over an hour 40, and I think that's the perfect runtime for this film. I did feel that the finale went on a little bit longer than it really needed to, but I do think that the runtime, the pacing, is pretty spot on. When it comes to the characters, I am a little bit mixed on both the characters themselves and the performances from the actors. Charlie, played by William Ragsdale, our lead in this movie, I'll admit takes some time to warm up. His performance early on in the movie is a little 50-50 for me, but the further through the film he gets, the desperation and panic begin to take over, and I think he improves quite a bit. And Charlie as a character I think is pretty good. He's flawed and definitely still a bit immature, but that does change over the course of the movie to the point where he is able to help fight Jerry and prioritise what's most important to him. That is his character arc. I did find that scene funny of when his friends go to check on him. Over the first half of the movie, Charlie's becoming more and more paranoid that Jerry is coming for him. So his friends go to check on him, they go up to his bedroom, and as they open the door, The entire room is covered in lit candles. There's garlic on the windows, and he's sitting there on his bed, sharpening a steak. Oh yeah, he's definitely doing well. Anyway, I quite enjoyed Roddy McDowall as the very over-the-top and deliberately hammy actor Peter Vincent. The way that he's portrayed in this movie feels like a throwback to the performances that you'd normally see in things like the old Hammer horror movies. Even right down to his costume, which does look very similar to Peter Cushing's costume in Dracula. When they first mentioned his name in this movie, I did wonder if it was meant to be a reference to Vincent Price. And it turns out it was. And Peter Cushing. And not only that, Tom Holland, the director, actually wanted Vincent Price to play Peter. That would have been interesting. But as it is, I think that Roddy McDowall is really good in this movie, and I think that Peter is a really entertaining character. I really like how his character is handled and how he changes when he's confronted with the real deal, and has to become what he always pretended to be, which is a really fun arc for his character to go on. He's a decent character, and I really liked him. Dorothy Fielding as Charlie's mum, I thought was surprisingly entertaining for what little screen time she has. I did think she would factor into the story a bit more than she actually does, but she was a fun character and she is played well. I think she might be deaf though. The amount of loud noises and talking that she just doesn't hear. Your son's getting thrown around in the other room and you're still fast asleep. Anyway, I will say, Amanda Bierce as Charlie's girlfriend Amy, I was a bit 50-50 on. Her performance is okay overall, but as a character, there isn't really that much to it, and she does feel like one of the weakest additions to this. I like some of her scenes towards the end because of how Amy fits into the finale and how she as a character is used, but I don't think she was the best. And as for Evil Ed, played by Stephen Jeffries, he is honestly one of the most annoying characters I've seen in a good while. I couldn't stand him. It actually got to a point where I was rooting for Jerry to get him. Look, I get that he's meant to be just a teenager, he's immature and pretends to be a lot cooler than he is, but come on. And that laugh. Ugh. Credit where credit's due. The scene down the alleyway where Jerry confronts him, I think the performance from Stephen is actually pretty good, and we do get to see a much more human side to him. And I think the way that Ed is played works a little better when he's in full vampire mode, but it does take a while to get there, and he does have a good amount of screen time. He as a character just didn't work for me. And then we have Jerry the Vampire, played by Chris Sarandon, and his familiar, played by Jonathan Stark. Jerry Dandridge I was pleasantly surprised by, and he turns out to be a pretty decent antagonist and threat to Charlie. He's not amazing, and he does ham it up quite a bit when he gets threatened, which is admittedly a little funny. Sorry. But I really thought he was good and one of the best parts of this. He's calm, he's suave, charming, seductive. I love how slow he is when he stalks someone, and the way the camera sometimes switches to his POV without you realising, and that does add a little tension. He is a pretty good antagonist, and I think that Chris Sarandon plays him well. He's not the brightest vampire though. Why wouldn't you board up the windows around where your coffin is? Why do you think Dracula has a tomb? Rookie mistake. Anyway, and as for Jonathan Stark as Billy, I thought he was kind of fun. And for all the little digs at slasher movies that this film has, he ends up pulling a Michael Myers at one point, and it was pretty effective. Anyway, one thing I do like is how the vampires look and the makeup that's used for them. I'll admit, at first I thought it did look a little bit dated, but it did grow on me as time went on. And when other characters start changing into things, there's actually some pretty decent designs. And it's not just the one consistent look for all the vampires that appear in this film. They all look unique and individual. Plus, there's one vampire design during the finale that I genuinely thought looked pretty cool. It's probably my favourite vampire design in this. It actually does look quite unique and scary, and I think it may have had an influence on 2020's version of The Witches. The makeup effects are surprisingly really good, and they do add some grit to this world. As I said, some of the earlier stuff to me felt a tad dated, but towards the second half, there's a lot of transformation sequences that blur together makeup and visual effects, and they're shockingly good. It is definitely stuff that has been seen and done before. Like, there's a few scenes where characters melt and morph into things, and it's very similar to the resurrection scene in Hellraiser. That was amazing. The wolf reverting back into a vampire is honestly amazing, and I love how slow and gnarly it is. There is some really good effects in this, and apparently because of his background in theatre, Chris Sarandon actually helped apply some of his own makeup too, which I thought was really cool to know. There's also a decent amount of atmosphere to the film, especially outside Jerry's house. The set design for that house is actually pretty cool. Just tone down the fog a bit. I genuinely thought the fog would be part of a jump scare or two at some point in the movie, purely because of how it's used. But nope, there is like 2 jump scares in this, or at least 2 attempts at jump scares, and as you can tell, they didn't really get me. Considering the title and the genre that this movie is classed as, I was expecting something a little bit scarier, and a bit funnier too. This is actually a horror comedy which did take me by surprise, and I was a little bit disappointed by both of those elements. Not that this doesn't have any creepy moments or funny jokes, there is plenty of horror and laughs in this. I was just expecting a bit more. In the UK, this is rated an 18, and that's the highest age rating you can get for a theatrical release. Now, there's a load of older movies that the BBFC have re-rated over the years. I think this needs to be one of them. At this point in time, this is still rated an 18, but I think this could easily pass for a 15, at least in my opinion. It does have some horror, it does have some gore and violence and a bit of nutty stuff as well, but it is quite tame, at least in my opinion. This isn't a movie that kids should be watching, don't get me wrong, but personally, I don't think that it's that bad, at least for an 18 certificate. Anyway, and as I said, this does have a sense of humour and it can be quite funny at times, but if I'm being honest, it's not always obvious whether the laughs are meant to be intentional or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It did get a little chuckle out of me at some points, and I did like some of the funnier moments as I said earlier. It's cheesy, it's camp, and on top of that, it's very much an 80s movie. But I don't think that they're bad qualities to have. If anything, I think they help add to a sense of fun. This is a fun movie, and that 80s vibe does extend to the soundtrack from Brad Fiedel. It is the most 80s sounding soundtrack you can think of for a horror movie. And it doesn't sound bad. I've always quite liked the electronic 80s synth rock type soundtracks, so I really like this one. The theme is really good, if not the most memorable, but the Fright Night song that's featured in the credits is really catchy. I might add it to my Halloween playlist now that I'm thinking about it. The only real criticism that I really have for the soundtrack is that there's a few very tense moments in this movie that don't really need an underscore. I think that utilising silence and sound effects is a much more effective way of building up tension than using a soundtrack. But outside of that, I really liked it. Overall, while I will admit I was a little underwhelmed by Fright Night, I did have some fun with it. It has a great look, some good ideas and visuals. I really like the music and the makeup effects. Some of the characters and performances didn't quite work for me, but others did. It can be funny, it can be tense, but it doesn't always mix together. And yes, I was hoping for a bit more of both. But that said, I think this is enjoyable, it is fun, and if it sounds like something that you might enjoy, I definitely think that it is worth a watch. I can't say this is a must watch, and I don't know if I'll be revisiting this in the future, but we'll see. It does have its fans, and if you are one, then great, enjoy it. As it is, I had fun with it, I'm glad I finally got to check this out. So with all that being said, my rating for Fright Night is a 6 out of 10. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. If you have seen Fright Night, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future rewind reviews you'd like to see me do in the future, let me know down below. And let me know if the sequel and the remake are worth a look. I'm really curious. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. Happy Halloween!